We are here for my expert interview for Pruzan. And these interviews are basically speaking to women who are in my network, who I find really inspiring, who work in different fields, yet all have a sort of shared love for exercise, movement, running, anything in that world, which they're passionate about alongside their other sort of interests. Emma and I met because Emma interviewed me for a platform called News Movement, and our sort of little video article was tapping into running as a woman in London and asking me a bit more about the sort of virtual run club, which I was running through 2023 to 2024. And that's how I came across Emma as a sports journalist. So without further ado, Emma, did you want to, in your own words, introduce yourself after that as well?
I'm Emma. I'm 26 years young, should I say? And I'm a journalist specialising in sport, particularly women's sport. In my spare time, you'll probably find me doing sport or watching sport. So kind of just living and breathing it, really.
Oh, well, great intro. And also so interesting. Like, I think it's rare to know someone who's a journalist. I think it's quite a cool job to have, and also maybe quite London centric. So I feel very lucky that we met the way we did. And I just wanted to find out how you got into that. Like, how did that journey into your current career go?
Yeah, so it wasn't like, I think as most people tell you, like it wasn't kind of like a linear one-way street. And so it kind of all started when I was at uni, and the opportunity came up to join the student radio, and I was like, yeah, why not? Sounds fun. And I got to do some sort of commentary at sports events and stuff, just sort of in my free time, juggling that with, you know, my studies and stuff. So I was studying for a degree in geography. And then, you know, after I graduated, I was kind of thinking like, oh, I really enjoyed doing that commentary and stuff on the radio. Why don't I think about actually doing journalism as a career? And I'd always thought about doing journalism. I'd always been fascinated by the whole media world. And obviously I'd always loved my sport as well. So I went into London, did a master's in broadcast journalism. And that kind of just reaffirmed to me how much I loved it and wanted to get involved with this world. So I joined a community radio station in South London called Riverside, when I was doing my master's, and did their sports show on a Saturday while I was doing my master's degree, just as a sort of voluntary thing. And that was great fun. It taught me a lot. You know, I produced the show, I presented the show as well with a really cool team of people who are now also doing some, you know, really cool things in the media world. And then straight after my master's, I went to TalkSport and I did a year as assistant producer on kind of their weekend programs and live sport programs. And that was kind of my first live proper newsroom experience, which was a bit of a whirlwind, but you kind of do have to learn through doing in this world. So I was kind of very grateful to like get to cut my teeth there. And then I was very lucky to be approached by the News Movement, who really wanted to sort of commit to their women's sport reporting, and, you know, said, do you fancy sort of coming over and joining us? And at the time, it was a, you know, total startup, very few journalists on board. And I joined 3 years ago now. And obviously it's really cool to see over 3 years this company grow from being a very, very small team to a global organization now, sort of catering for Gen Z audiences on social media. And I'm very lucky that I get to kind of lead on our women's sports stuff, but I also obviously do like the day-to-day news reporting as well. So it's a busy job, but it's a super fun one as well.
Yeah, it sounds really, really busy and quite varied. And my next question was sort of, having spoken to a lot of women who have shared their story with sport and fitness, is there anyone's story in particular who you feel we should all be more familiar with?
Yeah, this was, you know what, this was such a hard question. I've spoken to so many brilliant people, and actually, and then I had to kind of, I was like, no, come on, Emma, make a decision. Because like, one thing I have learned in this job is you've got to be decisive, and indecision doesn't really work. So I was like, no, let's go with one name. And actually, I'm going to mention the name of Amy Lasso, who I actually spoke to right at the beginning when I started at the News Movement. So it literally must have been like 2.5 years ago now. And the reason, and you probably haven't heard her name, but that's because she's you probably haven't heard her name, but she's the captain of the South Sudan's women's football team. And at the time, getting to interview her was obviously really challenging because, she was obviously based in South Sudan. The connection was terrible. I think we tried a couple of times to speak, but every time the Wi-Fi kept getting out. But the reason why I kind of raised her story is just being really cool, and I'd love more people to kind of know about these kind of stories, is that it's that real example of the struggle of women to do sport in kind of other regions of the world, where we all kind of like maybe take for granted the fact that we can just, join a local football team if we want to. Because the things that Amy was telling me was all about, I mean, obviously they're, the country is in a sort of humanitarian crisis, but also just the kind of gender roles of being a woman in South Sudan kind of means that not a lot of women in some communities can actually play football because they're expected to be doing the housework or the cleaning. Once they're married, like she told me, like that's it for sport, like your career ends right there. So of course, if you're playing in football in the national team, then, you can't get married. I think she even told me one story about this girl in the team that had got married and then she had to like give up her national team career because that kind of signaled the end for her, and then she had to kind of go and start a family. And yeah, I think the reason why it's just so important to share these kind of stories is that obviously we, like the media does a increasingly good job at telling the stories of women in this country doing amazing things in sport, which is obviously brilliant, but there is also the other side of it where there are lots of women in other regions of the world that don't obviously get to talk much about their opportunities in sport, and also they don't have the same kind of opportunities that we do here. So kind of really hit it home to me that there are differences, and maybe the media can look in other places to kind of tell these kind of stories.
Yeah, and also if you did that right at the start of working with the news movement, I guess it was quite a reaffirming moment that you're raising this sort of awareness around stories which could really make a difference, and it speaks for parts of the world which we maybe don't hear about in everyday media. I did have one question. Do you find that sort of with your friends and what they look at in terms of the news apps which everyone goes to, do you find that it doesn't represent women's sport stories which you maybe find interesting and which you try to source yourself?
I think it's funny because obviously I've grown up I've grown up with sport. I live and breathe sport. I watched sport when I was younger, so I was always kind of slightly biased towards consuming more sport than probably most people would have done. I think the problem is for people that don't seek it out, it's very difficult to find. I'm not saying that's not changing, because it is, particularly in the past couple of years. Obviously England winning the women's Euros was a huge moment, and that kind of seemed to be such like a catalyst for like loads of change. But equally, if you still look at traditional newspapers and you look at like the back pages and stuff, it's largely all male sport being reported on there, or male athletes. I think social media is doing a better job now of, if you can follow certain accounts that actually, there are some really cool accounts on Instagram that I follow. One of them's like the Female Athlete Project, I think it's called, and they like just raise stories of just female athletes and things like that. So I think now what's nice is that you can kind of like create your social feeds to make sure you are seeing that news, which I kind of didn't have when I was like growing up as a teenager. But I still think like traditional media has a very long way to go. Obviously it's great to see broadcast coverage on TV, and commentary on radio, but I think in terms of the news and actually like what's going on and kind of the more issue-based women's sport reporting, I still think that's got a little bit of work to do.
Yeah, it's also so nice to hear you speak about this as a journalist, to sort of remind ourselves that it is making a conscious effort for our feed to be varied and to reach different circles, because I know the way these apps work, it's really easy to sort of think your world is the world, and actually maybe that page you've just suggested, we can put that in the notes of this episode, because it'd be really cool to tap into something is maybe more representative of women in sport. My next question was going to be maybe a different interview. Who have you come away from the interview feeling most inspired by, and why?
Yeah, so again, I could have I'm going to say I really struggle with this as well. But again, decision is the key to journalism. So I went with another one here. I think the one interview that really, there was one interview that I really walked away from, and I was like, wow, like it kind of changed my thinking in a lot of ways. And that was with Casa Semenya, who is probably more of a household name to lots of people that are listening or watching this. If you don't know her story, she's a double Olympic gold medalist, 3-time world champion in the 800 meters. And for her whole career, really, she's been fighting to run because people believe she shouldn't be running in the female category because she was born with what's called a difference in sex development, or a DSD, which means that she has internal testes and a high level of testosterone. So that's kind of the backdrop to her fight. It's a fight to kind of to run in the female category. And like, no matter kind of what your opinions are about whether she should be fighting, whether she should be running in the female category, what I should also say is that obviously by having internal testes, it raises your level of testosterone, and people obviously say that gives you a performance advantage. But when I was just chatting to her, I think, you know, forgetting all kind of the real technical difficulties and obviously what your opinion is on whether casters should be allowed to compete in the women's category, it was more of the fact that for like ever since she was 18, for years, for like more than 10 years of her life, the whole world has been questioning who she is, what she is. And it was her kind of thoughts on just like being able to deal with that amount of criticism and questioning her own body and who she is, and her perspective on the world, which is like, you know, those people won't define me, and her ability to channel that negativity and make sure that it doesn't affect her. I just thought that was like absolutely astonishing. And I know obviously athletes do have that, you know, really amazing, I've spoken to loads of athletes, and obviously they have this really amazing ability to be so focused in their thinking and, you know, disciplined and all of this. But for someone to somehow not let those really horrible, toxic, negative comments affect them for a period of like 10-15 years was just super cool. And just, she was so open about her experiences with all of that. So yeah, again, I would really recommend that people can go and watch that interview. It's on YouTube, and it's got a lot more detail about her story in general, but it's just a really inspiring story of fighting to define your identity and not letting other people define your identity. And I think that's where, like, that's the kind of reporting I love. It's not, you don't have to be really interested in sport to necessarily want to like know about Caster's story, because actually it's about defining who you are, not letting other people define who you are. And I think that's when the real sweet spot is. It's almost like sports stories told by athletes, but you don't have to be a really, you know, into the 800 meter running or into track athletics to want to know about, you know, how to not let negativity define who you are as a person and to kind of forge forward, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, it's also so nice to hear someone who's actually under scrutiny to have that headstrong approach, because a lot of us never really have to live through that sort of judgment from the media. We get to go about our lives and not really know what other people think of us, unless maybe you're quite an argumentative person, maybe you do hear. But for many of us, it's actually just more of an internal dialogue we're against. So yeah, we'll definitely share the link to that interview. It'd be amazing to hear how
real things
with that. The next question I was going to ask, I guess looping back to when I said earlier that for many of us, we don't really get to meet journalists. It's quite a sort of cool career, which a lot of people would aspire to do, especially if they're into writing or interviewing when they're younger, and they love meeting people and they're sort of curious about this career. What piece of advice would you give someone who wants to become a journalist?
I think the word you mentioned, curious, is like really important, because like the reason why I kind of like got into this was because I was just like curious about the world. You be curious about people, want to talk to people, want to listen to people, and you know, ever since I was, even when I was, you know, obviously when I was like 12 years old, I wasn't like, I'm going to be a journalist, but I was curious about the media world. I was watching, you know, the big broadcast of big, you know, events like the marathon or the Olympics, and thinking like, oh, that's actually really cool. And, you know, how can I be involved with that? And how can I kind of communicate through a camera that atmosphere and excitement of being at a sports event? So what I would first say is, like, if you've got that passion for something, the really cool thing about journalism is that you can talk about what you're passionate about, and obviously and help people understand your passion. So the first thing is, yeah, if you have a passion, absolutely go for it, and also be curious about listening to other people and talk to as many people as you can. I think I'd also say, like, networking is just like so important, and I mean, obviously, even like, you know, we've stayed such close friends since I spoke to you in December, but it's keeping, you know, not obviously not everyone's going to be on a friendship level, but it's keeping those contacts and numbers of people so that when things come up, when opportunities come up, when you need help with something, that you can reach out to them. And it's not often, I'm not saying you're reaching out to them asking for a job, but it's reaching out to them and asking them for advice, or like, even if they're not in journalism, if they're in some related creative industry field, they might be able to help you. And the more people that are looking out for you, the better. So don't be shy to reach out to people. Take people for as many coffees as you can. Maybe some decaf in there so you don't get too caffeinated. But meet as many people as you can. If there's an opportunity to go to like in-person events, they're great. And also, like, what I find really nice is that anyone can just find their personal style by like just trying it. So I know loads of people, you know, back when I was at uni, like blogging was really like vlogging, should I say, and everyone was kind of like, you know, writing pieces on, you know, personal, you know, blog sites. I mean, I didn't do it, so I didn't really know how it worked. But again, that was them just like practicing their writing style, or just like finding out what they're interested in. Nowadays, you know, anyone can hop on TikTok and just like, if you want to tell a story, tell a story, and you know, people will be very quick to give you feedback on that. And obviously, don't let the negative comments get to you. I mean, I think if I let the negative comments get to me, I don't think I'd be here. But there are lots of offer positive comments. So yeah, distilling all that down, I would say, be curious, keep your network going, be resilient, and obviously don't, you know, take on criticism and feedback, but don't let it get to you. And also just like find your voice, experiment with your style. And it's taken, and I'm still discovering that. I think it's taken me years and years to kind of find what I'm really like, what my real like authentic voice is. And you only do that by experimenting with it. So just, yeah, give it a go. And also, like, if anyone wants to like reach out to me and chat, like, I'm always happy to do that, because I know that when you're trying to make a start in this industry, it's that just any conversations you can have with anyone's really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's so nice to hear that. And I think that's one thing which I found when I was getting into presenting. I remember the first day I ordered a microphone on Amazon and went to Beyonce's concert in Stratford and just went up to strangers and was like, why are you here? And that first like move of showing up and getting off the tube and thinking, okay, I'm going to go up to strangers was really difficult. But actually, when you're having conversations which you find interesting, you do forget the camera's there. Yeah. And I think you like reconnect with the reason you've got into it is wanting to speak to people. And I think, yeah, whatever conversation you're in, as long as you're interested in the topic, like, it can only go well.
I also think the real, like, speaking on that, and it reminds me, because how many times I've been doing, like, I mean, they call them box pops, like walking out to people in the street, asking them to chat. But like, and obviously, like, when I first started doing that, you just feel terrified and you don't want to do that. But obviously, it's such an important part of, you know, this whole world, journalism world. But I also, like, someone once said to me, like, it's a privilege, obviously, to do what you get to do, and it's a privilege to get to talk to who you get to talk to. So, like, enjoy it and use it. And, you know, it's awesome getting to meet loads of new people on a daily basis, listen to people's life stories, you know, and obviously being able to share them and communicate them with other people is actually like a really rewarding job. So it's almost like turning that fear into like, actually, it's super cool to be doing this, and it's obviously super important to be sharing people's stories.
Yeah, well, very inspired.
I try.
I know you mentioned earlier that when you're not at work, you can be found doing sport. It's very like me, although I probably use the word exercise instead of sport, just because I'm not very competitive. I wish I was. But in your sort of time, in your journey with exercise and sport, what has been a moment where you've sort of felt most proud of yourself, and what's been your greatest achievement in that journey?
You know, I'm laughing because I'm so competitive with myself. It's not even with other people. I'm just, everything has to be beaten in some way. And my mum said to me so many times before, like, Emma, this has just got to stop. And I'm just like, no, there'll always be something else I can do. But in terms of the most memorable. I think there are a couple. I mean, my kind of background in sport is like I've just basically done everything. I probably haven't done anything exceptionally well, but I've just kind of like done everything, tried everything, just because I enjoy it so much. And I include sport and exercise in that because, you know, I love going to the gym, and my new thing is, you know, lifting weights, and I kind of keep rediscovering things that I really enjoy, whether that be fitness classes, training for different events, and just giving things a go, really. And, you know, I've been doing that ever since I was at, you know, I was in team sport ever since I was primary school, and it's kind of been a long love affair, which I think will be set to continue well until I'm, you know, with a walking stick, which I'll probably still be on a spin bike then. But probably the most memorable I think was last year. I think I did bite off more than I could chew in terms of signing up for all these like events. So I did the London Classics, which, if people don't know, it's you do the London Marathon, the Ride London, which is a 100-mile bike ride, and then the Serpentine Swim, which is, I can't remember the distance, but it's quite a long swim in the Serpentine in Hyde Park in London. And if you do all of those 3 events, you get this London Classics medal, which I think for me it was just special because I signed up to all these things thinking, Emma, you really have done one this time, and you just can't meet all of that with everything else that's going on in your life, you know, friends, relationships, work. And I think everyone can relate to that, in the sense that, you know, some people will say like, I don't have time to train, or I don't have time to sport. And I will always find time to train. I will always find time to sport because it's such an important part of who I am. And I like having goals to meet. So yeah, finishing that was really cool. I mean, I also think, like, you know, obviously we both love running, and I would also say my first half marathon was also like something I was really memorable, because before I trained for that half marathon, I was like convinced I couldn't run more than like 10K. And then when I did it, I was like, oh my God, maybe I can. And like, I think, you know, as you said, we've chatted about, like, once you do these things, it's like proving to yourself that you can do things that you didn't think you could do. And that in itself is just like the really cool thing that sport can give you, and it will always give you if you kind of seek out those opportunities.
Yeah, it's just those moments where you do things you never saw yourself doing, and also they don't feel too difficult in that moment. That's the weirdest part for me. And I think I had it very much last year when I did my first half marathon in 4 years, and I think I went through a really bad patch mentally, and then coming back and doing a race I never thought I would get back to being someone who could train for that and do it with friends, and it was like a social day and a fitness day. I would have dreamed to have that in a time where I wasn't very well. So I got very emotional that day. And actually, with the London Marathon, the day I did it, I thought I'd be like crying and really emotional, but I was just so happy it was done. I didn't think too much into it. I just thought, wow, okay.
Oh my God, I was the complete opposite. I think I ran the last like K where all my family were. They were right near the finish line, and I just passed them, and I just had a meltdown, started crying, like burst out. Of course, they were like, oh my God, Emma, like, you actually need to finish. And I was an absolute wreck, like gave myself like a near blown asthma attack, like probably didn't finish it because I was crying so much. But I think it is all that emotions of just like completing something that you've been working so hard towards. And then you finish it thinking like, oh, that was hell. I also kind of enjoyed it. Oh, when's the next one? Now your family are like, what? What are you doing?
You go one of two ways, I think. But no, it's really good to hear that. And especially the sort of competition you mentioned. I think a lot of people listening will be listening sort of who quite like running, but it's also a sport which is so well complemented with other exercise. You really see like your progress in running when you like do other exercises which make you feel stronger and things like that. But working in sports journalism, especially sort of covering female sports, how has that career impacted your relationship with exercise?
I think if anything, it's just kind of like affirmed my love for sport and exercise. I think every time I go to an event, every time I interview a female athlete, like I'm like kind of an excited kid. I just kind of sit there and I'm like, I love listening to their journey in sport. I love watching them perform, and it's like, and I'm sure when people watch the London Marathon on TV, they go like, oh, I'm going to sign up for next year, just because they've seen it. And I think I still get that reporting on it, obviously, because the excitement for me and hearing their stories is enough to make me kind of literally run to the gym that evening and get going. And I think also, I mean, you know, because I don't just do sport and I do news as well. And obviously sometimes that news, reporting on news, whether that's be, you know, wars or, you know, particularly sort of tough news to read and consume, and you're seeing pretty horrid images, I think bundle that all together also means that, you know, my gym time and my exercise time becomes a way to just detach myself from, if it's been a really, you know, tough day and I've been reading some really, you know, horrible stories from around the world and trying to, you know, convey them, it gives me that detachment from life for a little bit, which kind of helps me just calm down, put everything in perspective, and not let that get to me mentally. So I think ever since really I've left uni and I've started working in the media, kind of my exercise has become an even more important way just to de-stress, and I call it my sort of sacrosanct me time. It's like AirPods in, I'm not replying to any messages for an hour, and I always, as I say, I'll always make time for that, because, you know, media is a busy job and it's long hours, sometimes it's weekend work, but even if it's half an hour of exercise a day, even if it's walking to work, even if it's you know, throwing myself in the pool at 6 a.m. in the morning, I will make sure it happens, because for me it's for my mental health, it's just super important.
Oh, well, very inspiring that you manage it all. But yeah, like you said, if you're meeting people who are sort of encouraging how much you get out of exercise, I guess it is quite like the best incentive.
And like, I sound
people when we go to work and like no one speaks about it.
And it sounds like, obviously, like this is such a slick machine, and like I would honestly want to say like it's not a slick machine, but I think what I would also say is that by, like, you know, fitting in my gym time, even if my day has gone like absolutely just like not how I want it to, I feel like everything's gone wrong, at least if I've either, you know, had a workout or I go for a run after work, I just, again, it's putting it back in perspective and being like, no, Emma, you haven't, you know, let all the plates fall off, all the wheels. There is still one wheel on the car, and you can still go forward tomorrow. And then I can go to sleep happy.
Oh, well, no, it's so nice to hear that. My next question was going to be, I don't know whether it's a podcast or a book or a film. Is there anything you've sort of read or listened to recently which you would recommend other people do the same?
So, I mean, first this is going to make me sound so boring, because I generally don't watch many films. Don't watch many films, and everyone's going to be like, wait, do you live under a rock? I'm not really a film girl. But if I had to choose one that kind of really did get my emotions going, and probably lots of people won't have watched, it's called Copper 71. It's almost like a docu-film, if you want to call that, and it's about the forgotten Women's World Cup that happened in 1971, but it was erased from the history books, and I got to go to a screening of that a few months ago, and I generally sat in the little cinema they were in, and one minute I was like crying my eyes out with laughter, and then the next minute I was just generally in tears, because it was just so sad. They'd found all the archive footage. They'd spoken to the ladies that played in that World Cup, and they were talking about, you know, their journey of going off to Mexico, being these kind of like forgotten footballers of the world that nobody even ever heard of. And yeah, it was such a roller coaster of emotions. So like, and it's not that long either. It's very consuming, but I think it's like an hour and a half. So if people want to learn a little bit but also be thoroughly entertained, I would highly recommend watching that for kind of the sporty girls out there. And I'm sure as I'm talking, lots of people be like, wait, there was a Women's World Cup in 1971. It's like, yeah, there was, but unfortunately that was completely forgotten about. And then, I mean, podcast wise, I do listen to a few podcasts. One of them, I mean, they're quite newsy podcasts, but one of them that people might want to check out is The Sports Agents, which is quite a new sport podcast. It's hosted by Gabby Logan and Mark Chapman. But what's really nice is that it's not like a football podcast. It's not like a boxing podcast. It covers loads of different sports. I mean, the one I listened to this morning was about cycling and kind of, the World Anti-Doping Agency, and kind of this, athlete had a time with, potentially being banned from the sport because of a problem with the drugs test, but they also do boxing, and they also do athletics. And it's just, I think in the run up to the Olympics, it's quite a cool one to have on your radar. Yeah.
Sounds really good. I'll definitely listen to that one because I'm sort of always looking for new podcasts, and especially in a space I don't know too much about. It's like I would love to learn more.
It's nice learning something, isn't it? Like, I think sometimes like people go to podcasts because they just want to like hear what they already know, but like I'm like, no, I just want to listen to something. Like for me, like boxing is a world I'm just like really trying to learn more about at the moment. So for me to listen to a podcast about boxing in a really kind of simple way is just super helpful.
Yeah, well, it's very conversational, which is really nice.
Exactly.
So we've come to the last question I had for you, which is, I mean, we've actually met after a run before, around the time that I was first getting into training for my marathon, but it might be that spot, it might be somewhere else, but I would love to hear your favorite running route in London.
You know what, it's probably, so there's two places. One is this lovely kind of route called Parkland Walk, which goes from Finsbury Park up to Alexandra Palace, so it's in North London, and it's really cool because obviously it's a very busy kind of area of North London. It's quite urban, but like you can run along this kind of disused railway track, all the way from Finsbury Park up to Ali Pali. I think it's like a 5k stretch. It's just quite a nice stretch. It's all kind of woods track. Yeah, as I say, it's a disused railway line. They've still got some like old platforms left on that track. So again, love running down there, and obviously in summer it's really cool as well with the trees. And it takes you off the main roads of London, which, you know, I'm always keen to get away from if it's light and I can. And then, but yeah, the other place would be Hampstead Heath. I have such a love affair with that place. Like, I get lost every time I run around there. It's almost like I discover a new path every time. And I think what's so nice is that because there's always people around, it kind of, I always feel safe there as well. I think there'd be a lot of London parks that I perhaps wouldn't choose to go in by myself as a runner, particularly like woodland tracks and that kind of thing. But there's always runners around. There's always people around. You know, they've got the athletics tracks, the ponds. And yeah, as I say, like I just keep finding new tracks, and I don't, you know, someone will have to challenge me to find another place in London that can offer that kind of terrain. And also, if you love hills, get yourself to Hampstead Heath.
Yeah, it's definitely like a bit of a sort of confidence builder if you can do it, because you're just running up those hills and then you feel so good because then it's like all the way down the other side and you get such achievement.
I don't envy the people that do like park run there every Saturday. I mean, they must be made of something else. They must have really strong legs.
Yeah. Oh well, I'll definitely try the Finsbury Park one.
I haven't done that
where
one yet.
I am, I guess it's always nice to know, especially if it's a 5k route. It means that people who live a run away from Finsbury Park and it.
Oh, sorry, I thought you meant the park run. Sorry. But yes, it's a really nice route, Parkland Walk. So would recommend.
I'll try it. But yeah, that was everything. Thank you so much for your time, and it's just been so interesting to hear more about what from your job you've sort of taken away, and like you said, how it's impacted your relationship with exercise as well. It's just so nice to hear different people in different careers and why they turn to exercise when they do, because yeah, I'm very passionate about that myself. It's been really good to speak to you today, and to just point out that you are one of the keen returning runners to our Pruzan Run Club, which is 5 and 10Ks at the moment. So yeah, we'll see you at the next one.